Welcome to another episode of Viatorian Voices, where our conversations on the way give witness to the ministry and spirituality of walking with youth and those who go underserved. In this episode, we hear from Associate Kim Martinez. Kim made her initial commitment in 2009 and her definitive commitment in 2019. She is from Springfield, Illinois, but moved out to Las Vegas when she started at Bishop Gorman High School, which was founded by the Viatorians and continues as an archdiocesan ministry. She's now beginning her 30th year at Gorman. Kim has been a campus minister, leading countless retreats and service opportunities, and she now serves as a theology teacher. In 2020, Kim earned the Father John E. Lenan CSV Theology and Ministry Endowed Scholarship at Catholic Theological Union, a graduate school of theology and ministry in Chicago, co-sponsored by the Viatorians and several other women's and men's religious communities. As a Lenan scholar, Kim completed a master's in pastoral studies earlier this year, when she graduated alongside Father John Eustace CSV and Brother Giovanni Orduz CSV, who had each completed master's degrees as well. Viatorians are called to be teachers of the faith, and part of this is that we must be students of the faith too. Today, Kim reflects on her ministries, her recent studies, and her vocation as a Viatorian. I'm your host, Pre-Associate Dan Masterton. After you enjoy this episode, help us tell the Viatorian story by rating our podcast in your favorite app, sending this episode link to a friend, and praying for and encouraging young men considering Viatorian religious life. We started this conversation by asking Kim to share how she first encountered the Viatorians and began her relationship with our community. Enjoy!
Well, I first met the Viatorians. I was in high school. I was on a retreat, a tech retreat, which is kind of like Kairos. And Mick Egan and Mike Rice were the spiritual director and assistant spiritual director. Loved them. They taught at Griffin High School, which was a Viatorian high school in Springfield. And I grew up in Springfield. It's relatively small. So met other Viatorians during the tech years and became friends with several. Went to Chicago and for college, and I worked in the vocation office with Tom Von Baron. He was vocation director at the time. And then a few years later, he was president, Bishop Foreman, and he invited me out to teach. So we figured, what the heck, we might as well try Las Vegas. We visited and loved it. So we came out here, and that was 30 years ago. So I've worked at Bishop Foreman that entire time. As far as becoming an associate, about 3 or 4 years after I moved out here, they held a meeting at St. Viator Parish discussing the association program and inviting us to consider it and think about it. And it was a really cool concept at the time, hadn't really heard of much like that. And they started soon after that. I didn't commit right away. I needed time to think about it. I still had the small child and wanted to figure out if I could make that commitment. Because I think, we always took it seriously. It wasn't like, oh, I want to be a Viatorian and go socialize with those guys. We were really being asked to commit to a mindset and a way of life and to our faith. So I thought about it for a while. And then not a long while, I've been now almost 20 years. It's an important part of my life. It's part of my identity. It's who I am.
So, all these years at Bishop Gorman, campus ministry, and teaching theology, why did you decide at this point in your life that you wanted to think about a master's degree? What set you on that course towards thinking about grad school?
I know it is a little late in life to start, but I wasn't doing it for a new career or anything. I actually, there had been some changes at our school. And, with that, and I worked in campus ministry, I did retreats and our diocese, and there was just a feel that things were becoming more conservative. And it was harder to do my job, I just felt like, and maybe it was because I'd done it for a long time and I just needed something, I needed something more. And I was thinking about going back to school. I thought, I want more. I want to know more about my faith. I want to explore it and ways that I can use it. So I was at a Viatorian assembly and I was sharing that about 7 years ago, I think. And I was sharing that, and Dan Leiden and Corey Brost said, you should, think about doing CTU. And I'm like, well, I'm in Vegas. And they're like, no, they have an online program now. They just went to all online. And we have a fellowship that's open to associates. And you would be great. And I thought about it. It's like, oh gosh, could I go back to school at this point, But I did some research and it looked really interesting. And also, probably the most important things I started to look at it and form my thoughts were that I'm gonna retire in the next 8 or 10 years, I'm not that old, but I want to do something relevant with all of my life, from here on out every day, But when I retire, I want to be involved in things that matter and that I can use my faith and my Viatorian journey to, enhance. So they talked me into it. One of the best things I think that happened was the pandemic. And I know that's a terrible thing to say, but it was one hidden blessings, the
Yeah.
first when I first started, it was all online. So it was just discussion posts and everything. Giovanni was in my very first class. We became friends while he was still in Colombia. We were discussion post friending. And when the pandemic hit, they had to, go online to continue to teach. So now the distance students could join the online class, join the Zoom classes.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And yeah, and I had only taken 2 classes at that point, I think. And it was amazing because now I got to see everybody I was in class with. I got to see my instructors, beyond just a video and ask questions and be in conversations. We did a lot of small group work in all the classes. So we break into our Zoom groups, and we did some pretty big projects that way. I got to know people all over the world. I could be with a woman from Hawaii and a brother from Ireland and a seminarian from somewhere in Africa. It was amazing. And I loved the people in the program. I loved the students and they were all there for on the journey. I felt like it was a pilgrimage almost that we were on together. And then as far as faculty, they were amazing. I've read several of their books, either in class or out, and inspiring.
Yeah, I remember I was a student mostly in nights and summer from 2013 to 2016, and they were starting to realize the desire for online learning. And they were turning some of like the core Old Testament, New Testament Christology courses into hybrid with some of the teachers who had done it for a while and could convert their materials to online videos and discussion posts. And I give CTU a lot of credit because they were a little bit ahead of the curve as the demand continued to ramp up, and then COVID like blew it out of the water. But that's a cool element too, that the core stuff that was offered on campus then became like even more available to those of you doing distance learning. You had this whole wide library to dig into. And it's, you mentioned Giovanni being in class with you, and then you graduate also with John Eustace. I was a student there with Dan Leiden when he was doing his doctorate, and we were in class together. So it's neat to see a Viatorian umbrella kind of over a place that we don't necessarily always think of as kind of ours, but we do help sponsor it. And we have all these men and now women who have gone through it. And there's kind of a neat history there. So what did you think about CTU as a school? You said that you enjoyed the faculty that you had and you've read a lot of their stuff, whether in class or out. What was the experience of the school like to you? Because I would say CTU has a pretty distinct feel, and I wonder what your perception of it was.
It does. It does. I totally agree. I think the feel for me was very liberating, I guess. And obviously, the history, they're traditionally all religious. So the fact that the laity, well, the laity have been allowed to go, but I mean that you're getting to be with people who are formating their vocations, knowing you're on a journey similar to theirs, even as a lay person, and you get that glimpse into theirs is kind of a really cool thing. John was in a few of my classes on Zoom as well, so it was nice to be with Viatorians and have that camaraderie, and connection. And not only with Giovanni and John, but with all the Viatorians who had gone there before, And every time when I started, Mark Francis was still the president, and he was very supportive as well. It was a cool connection to the Viatorians, but then also just the vibe there. The world was so much bigger, and I knew that. I've been Catholic. I was a convert as a teenager, but I've been Catholic all my adult life. And I've had a lot of experiences, but here in Las Vegas, we're kind of in a fishbowl. We really are in the desert. We're disconnected to other communities and churches, just because we're so far away from everything. Sure, we can go to conferences, but I feel sometimes that there's a really narrow glimpse of the church when you're in a situation like that. So to be in a place where I was learning more about liberation theology and creation theology, feminist theology, and just so much more about scripture and history and life and God, and Jesus was such a cool thing. And it was something I could bring back to my students. At the time, I was still in campus ministry, but they're still your students too, and so there were great communication styles that I witnessed and experienced, and I felt really like I could answer the big questions with confidence. I think a lot of times our teachers, kids ask questions, and in religion, teachers don't want to answer it because they can't always back it up, or they don't allow for other ways of looking at things. So that was really cool for me.
Yeah, I definitely noticed, at least a bit in social media and online kind of evangelization, that there's a lot more emphasis on like apologetics or like systematic theology, which I don't think
Yeah.
is bad, but I think sometimes young people just need someone who will listen to them, give them like a good faith response, and then maybe even admit, like, I'm not entirely sure. You should keep asking that question. It's, a little bit of humility and kind of meeting them in their doubt and their curiosity a little more open-endedly. It's not the worst thing, I don't think.
Not that it changes the tenets of their faith or our faith, but it keeps them curious and involved, and maybe sets them on a different path a little. I think once a kid gets shut down and or told because that's just the way it is, or somebody's stern, it can shut them down forever. And that's not something we can afford in our church right now. We need our young people.
I feel like CTU is a good place to learn as a student and also a good place to go forth from as a teacher, because in the classroom you regularly are hearing tough questions, whether theologically or spiritually or pastorally. You're hearing from professors who are willing to engage with the questions, and you're having discussions in a way that's open, where people are presuming good faith and authentic curiosity, and then you can take that back to your students pretty easily because you've been a part of it yourself as you learned. Is
Yeah.
there anything in particular that you read or studied, or a class you took, or a professor you enjoyed, where you could sense, like, in yourself, like, oh, that's a lesson I want to bring back to my teens, or that's something I want to bring into a course that I know I'm going to have in the future? Were there any moments where you felt that toolbox expand and you had something you knew you wanted to bring back with you?
There were several. Dr. Barbara Reed, who's now the president, I took a class on Mary with her, and it was so enlightening. I think we have this kind of two-dimensional vision, or version of Mary, and not just Mary Magdalene, women in scripture, but she's a Luke scholar and wrote the book Wisdom, or the series Wisdom. She wrote the or edited the edition on Luke, and she just made me think of the roles that women played in Jesus's life, and I don't mean this from a feminist point of view, but just a lot of times I think it feels like they were supporting characters.
Mm.
And she just brought that alive in so many ways. So that was one. And then I took a class on death and dying with Dr. Fragamani, who is a tough guy, tough old bird, one wonderful if you hear this. But that just opened my mind to so much about what does happen in our afterlife, and how we look at things chronologically and with our human lens, and don't think about all the possibilities. So a lot of things in that class just kind of blew me away. And he had us create our own reading list as we went along. We would talk about, he would bring up a book and he would say, okay, add that one to your reading list. He'd tell about a story, he'd tell a story from it. So, and I bought several of those books. So,
As you think about what it was like to spend all this time and energy studying theology, especially when you're no longer, a teenager or young adult, you're choosing it more freely and you're able to enter into it differently. What would you say to a teenager or a young adult or even, a career professional adult who's thinking about studying theology?
I think there's so much misunderstanding about our church and Jesus, in our story. I say oftentimes, I think sometimes when people leave the church, it's not based on the church itself, but the last bad experience they had with a Catholic,
Totally agree.
because we represent the church. So we represent all of those things, whether we mean to or not. So all of our biases and prejudices come in. And when you study theology, and you put all of it together, you make you get to all the connections, that you kind of knew or heard about, and didn't really understand. So it helped me first learn so much about my faith and the church and human beings, and cultures, because I think it was a very intercultural experience. And I teach world religions, and I think I think every high school kid should take it, because it's such a great thing. We had such great professors there at CTU, but learn about the world. You can't know the full history of the world, or you can't really know anyone's history without knowing the religious aspect of it, because I was a history major for my undergrad, and the connection, you can't study history without knowing how it was influenced by religion and the journey of those 2,000 years for us, and many more for other faiths. But yeah, so it's just an enriching experience, even if you're not going to teach religion. But just it just increased my faith and my appreciation for my church too. It fed me in a way that I didn't expect. So what I have for the rest of my life is excitement for going deeper, and learning more.
That's all for this episode of Viatorian Voices. We'd like to thank Kim and pray for her ongoing commitment to the community and her continued service of young people in the church. Viatorian Voices Conversations on the Way is a production of Viatorian Vocation Ministry. The Viatorians are professed brothers and priests, together with women and men lay associates, who proclaim Jesus Christ and his gospel and raise communities where faith is lived, deepened, and celebrated. In the footsteps of Venerable Louis Querbes and under the patronage of St. Viator, we strive to do everything well, so that through us Jesus may be adored and loved. This includes Catholic Theological Union. CTU is a graduate school of theology and ministry that prepares effective leaders for the church who are ready to witness to Christ's good news of justice, love, and peace. The school is sponsored jointly by several women's and men's religious communities, including the Viatorians, who have frequently served as school administrators. CTU offers degrees, certificates, and ongoing education to those in religious formation as well as to lay people who learn side by side. To learn more about CTU, visit ctu.edu or follow CTU on social media at Chicago CTU. To learn more about our community, visit Viatorians.com or follow us on social media at Viatorian USA. Young adults seeking to connect with faith-filled peers can request to follow Viatorian YA on the Way on Instagram, where our young adult community is building new pathways for walking together in faith. Those seeking support and accompaniment in exploring God's invitations for them are invited to reach out to Vocation Ministry. Send us a DM on social media or email us to start a conversation. Remember, you can help us tell the Viatorian story by rating our podcast in your favorite app, sending this episode link to a friend, and praying for and encouraging young men considering Viatorian religious life. On behalf of Brother Peter and the Viatorian community, I'm Pre-Associate Dan Masterton. Venerable Louis Querbes, inspire us. St. Viator, pray for us. Adored and loved be Jesus.